Hi, today I want to conduct about the philosophy behind bias. My name is Wang, and nice to meet you guys. And yeah, the definition behind the philosophy behind bias is a bias is a systematic deviation from objectivity and fairness. So there's a three perspective we can look at the philosophy behind bias, which is as the epistemological perspective, which means that the bias challenge or even provoke the idea of objective knowledge. And secondly, we have cognitive and social origin. So bias often stand on heuristic, cultural conditioning, and social structures. And the last one, we have the ethical dimension. Ethical dimension, this is in ethical dimension, the bias can lead to unjust outcome, which is prone to social and institutional context. So yeah, this is the all main point from my presentation. Thank you.
For my part, I will present about types of bias. The first one is pre-trial bias. One of the example is flawed study design, which is not defining the risk and outcome of risk toward the patient. Next is selection bias, which is not selecting a proper population for a scientific research. The second types of bias is bias during trial, which include recall bias, where patient not remember correctly during the research, and also interviewer bias, where interviewer have the distinct relationship with the patient. Lastly, chronological bias. Then the last one is bias after trial. One of the bias after trial is citation bias, where the researcher or sponsors unwilling to publish unfavorable research. Next one is confounding bias, where we observe association is contradictory with each one another. So for me, to the next person.
Hi, my name is Adzhim bin Nohi Shamuddin, and my metric number is U2101117, and I'm going to explain about the causes of bias. So one of the causes for bias is poor study design and incongruence. This bias arises when research methodology is fundamentally mismatched with what the study aims. Next is the subconscious and preconceived beliefs. Researchers may unknowingly favor certain outcomes or interpret data in a way that aligns with their preconceived beliefs. Next is the influence of fund source, which defined as a situation where financial or other personal considerations may have the potential to have the biased professional judgment. And lastly is the academic and institutional pressure. Academic environment often prioritize the publication of positive findings, which leads to selective reporting. That's all from me.
This is my part in our group. I'd like to briefly highlight the critical implications of bias in scientific research. First, bias can lead to unreliable findings. Research that cannot be replicated undermines the credibility of scientific conclusions. This challenges the very foundation of scientific progress. Second, it results in flawed decisions. For example, if data is biased, drug trials might disproportionately benefit or harm certain genes, leading to real-world consequences. Third, there's the erosion of public trust. When people sense the research is biased, they lose confidence in science altogether, which can worsen social inequalities. In short, bias in scientific misleads, misforms, and harms. That's why addressing it isn't optional, it's urgent. Thank you.
So this is example of bias in research. For the selection bias, the example is a study about fitness only, includes young athletes. So the result cannot represent all the adults or non-athletes. Second is publication bias, which is for example only research showing that a new drug works is published, while study showing it doesn't work are enough. About the recall bias, in for example, in a survey, People who had a car accident are more likely to remember and report their past driving habits compared to the people who didn't. For the observer bias, for example, a research expect a treatment to work and unintentionally interpret the results more positively than they really are. And the last one is confirmation bias, where a scientist only looks for information that supports the hypothesis and ignores anything that disagree with it. So that's all for example.